Did you know there was a sequel to the Rocky Horror Picture Show? If you answered no, that's probably not a good sign, because I haven't seen a lot of people walking around in Dr. Birch neck costumes. So how good could it be, you may ask? Well, not that great. I mean, it's such a great movie, this movie called Shock Treatment. Shock Treatment is a 1981 musical film directed by Jim Sharman and co-written by Sharman and Richard O'Brien. Sharman and Richard O'Brien co-wrote the musical Rocky Horror Picture Show and the subsequent film version, and this was the film that followed Rocky Horror Picture Show. Richard O'Brien famously said, "It's not a prequel, it's not a sequel, it's an equal," which is the same as saying it's a sequel. Famous last words, and kind of as tone-deaf as the time that the Bee Gees said, "This Sgt. Pepper movie is going to be so much better than the original album, no one's even going to remember it." So in Shock Treatment, we're just continuing on from the original events of the first movie. Or perhaps it's an alternate reality where their car never broke down. But nonetheless, we have some of the same characters from the first movie, so that's familiar, although they're being portrayed by different actors. But we do have some of the original actors from the first movie playing different characters. But there is one actor who reprises his role from Rocky Horror, and that character's name is Ralph Hapschatt? Well, at least we got Richard O'Brien and Patricia Quinn once again playing a brother and sister who once again have an incestuous relationship. You know, the first time it was eccentric. The second time it's deeply concerning and leaves me nonplussed. Well, incest aside, what do we think of this movie? Well, it's not the greatest, but it's definitely not as bad as it was received at the time. While literally any old stupid nonsense these days gets reappraised as ahead of its time, this one does have some of that going on, as it's most commonly identified as predicting the rise of reality TV several decades beforehand. Thankfully, reality TV seems to have died off a little bit in terms of popularity in favor of a bunch of randos on the internet talking about a bunch of stuff they know nothing about. This was also around the same time as the Albert Brooks movie Real Life, which was another forerunner in recognizing the rise of reality TV. In this instance, Janet is played by Jessica Harper, who was on an absolute fire streak of the roles she was getting at this time. And Cliff DeYoung plays Brad. He also plays the oligarch, which I didn't really recognize the first time I watched the movie, so that's good acting. And honestly, both Shock Treatment and Rocky Horror's plots are not too far off. It's about the deconstruction of Brad and Janet's relationship, and they have to get back together by the end. And both movies are very, very horny. By all accounts, Shock Treatment was considered a major critical and financial flop when it first came out. Admittedly, it's almost impossible to follow up such an iconic performance as Tim Curry's from Rocky Horror, and you can't prefabricate a cult hit. You know, what do? You have Pink Flamingo 2, Flamingo Harder. It's just like how you can't just create this catchphrase just because you repeat it often enough. Stay sexy! And there aren't too many Easter eggs or inside jokes, you know. At no point does someone go, uh-oh, Brad and Janet's relationship is getting a little bit rocky. This movie does have an identity all of its own, and I even like the look that it went for a little bit more than Rocky Horror. But it's still difficult to pinpoint exactly what about Rocky Horror made it such an enduring cult classic with all the audience participation. I know Richard O'Brien has stated in the past that he thinks it's because it gave straight men an excuse to cross-dress. But with Shock Treatment, you're not going to find yourself throwing toilet paper at the screen during different parts of the movie, although that is how I like to watch all of my movies. On the toilet. The movie is actually quite resourceful, considering it was shot during an industry strike, so there's no exteriors. The whole thing is shot on a soundstage, which, to the movie's credit, I didn't even notice the first time when I watched the movie that it all takes place in a studio. To the movie's detriment, some of the actors after the fact, including Patricia Quinn, said, "Yeah, I didn't get the story, I didn't really know what we were doing, I didn't know what my motive was, so we kind of just made it up as we went along." But man, you gotta listen to that shock treatment commentary.
Woo! I'm trying to remember how many of them I slept with.
So I think the highlight of the movie for me is actually the songs. Richard O'Brien said that he favored the songs from Shock Treatment over Rocky Horror, which I don't know if I could go that far, but I would say some of the songs in this movie are just as good as the ones in Rocky Horror. I love the opening song about the town, Denton, and I like the title song, Shock Treatment. My favorite, definitely, though, of the whole movie is this lullaby song, and it's all in one shot, and it keeps moving throughout these different hotel rooms. Really great song and sequence. That's really my favorite. But there's also some throwaway stuff. The Bitching in the Kitchen song is stupid. It should be said that there's a small but consistent group of people who prefer this over Rocky Horror. I don't know that I would go that far, but I see where they're coming from. I'm also sort of fascinated by Richard O'Brien at this point in time, the late 70s, early 80s, because he keeps turning up in the most random of movies, like Digital Dreams, Jubilee, which I covered on this channel, and Graham Chapman's solo Python outing, The Odd Job. Shock Treatment is definitely more new wave. It's more kind of artificial and vibrant looking. I don't want to oversell this movie as it's like some crazy misunderstood lost gem, but it is fun on its own terms. Shock Treatment is much easier to find today than it was when I found it about 20 years ago and you had to shell out a bunch of money for somebody's crappy VHS copy. It's on Blu-ray now, it's been upgraded, and about 10 years ago there was a stage adaptation in the UK, so maybe Shock Treatment finally got its day in the sun. There's also apparently been all sorts of weird errors in all the formats that this movie's been on in all the years. There's like audio errors, there's syncing errors, so hopefully that's been corrected. I'll have to check my DVD copy from several years ago. I bought it at the 7-Eleven up the block back when they still used to sell DVDs, and I was like, Shock Treatment, what's this doing here? Come on, you're coming home with me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go triumphantly run up a flight of stairs in Philadelphia. Stay sexy.